Salve omnes, and welcome to a video on the passive voice in the present, imperfect, and future tenses. The passive voice is only something that really comes up at GCSE. You should not be translating in this way before that time. Okay, so what is that phrase, passive voice? Well, sometimes you may have noticed if you're typing away in Microsoft Office or other computer word processors, you get a little phrase coming up saying, passive voice, consider revising. What on earth does that mean? Well, what have I told you? That the nominative didn't always do the verb. Ehu, I hear you cry. Why on earth would the nominative not do the verb? Well, sentences you've been used to so far are active. These are the kind of verbs that we're normally seeing. I see, I was loving, I will hate, I carried, I had created. In these types of situations, the subject, the nominative, does the verb. That's not the case for the passive. Passive voice, we're adding in some part of the verb to be in English. So I see goes to I am seen. I was loving to I was being loved. I will hate to I will be hated. I carried to I was carried. Also, quick note, notice the difference between the imperfect I was being loved versus the perfect I was carried. This one is an action in the past that was not completed. This is an action in the past that was completed. And finally, we have the pluperfect, I had been created instead of I had created. In a passive voice, the subject has the verb done to it because voice describes the relationship of the subject and its verb. As a side note, don't believe Microsoft Office when it tells you the passive voice, consider revising. For some stupid reasons, it is sometimes considered to be weaker or less persuasive. This is a simplification, to say the least. It's something that began in the 1910s. There are sentences where using the passive voice, it's not really great, but there are also times when it's completely natural and not using the passive voice would be weird. Saying that, keep an eye on politicians using phrases like, I'm sorry, the people were upset. Notice the perfect passive verb there. Now that sounds like it means, I'm sorry that I upset people. It doesn't actually mean that though. I'm sorry that people were upset is something people say when they don't actually want to apologise. If you actually like to know more about this, Grammarly, of all places, does a pretty good rundown link there. Okay, so passive verb endings. You are not probably going to be surprised that Latin has more endings for passive verbs. Instead of ost mustis unt for our present tense, it's now ris tur mer mini unter. There are some similarities to the present tense, but ris tur mer mini unter. These are the passive endings. So salutor, I am greeted or I am being greeted. The senex is videtur in the foro, the old man is seen in the forum. O libri, hodie punamini. O children, y'all are being punished today. And finally, portae, of the urbis, they are incondenter, they are being burned. So, there's probably a question that comes up then, well, hold on, in those sentences, no one's doing the action. So who is doing the verb for a passive? Well, if we consider a couple of sentences with an active verb, we have the soldiers attacked the town and the penguins ate the lions. How would we put a passive verb where the verb is done to the subject, to the nominative, but keep this original meaning? Well, we add in the word by. The town was attacked by the soldiers, the lions were being eaten by the penguins, pictured below. The technical term for this is called the agent. This is the doer of the verb. So in a sentence with an active verb, the agent is nominative. It is the same person as the subject. So we can see here the puellae, nominative, they laudant, do the verb, to the accusative nuntium. In a passive sentence, we need to use the ablative, usually with the preposition a or ab, meaning by. Same as the English. Please note, this is the same basic rule in Latin as it is the rule for a or an in English. That is to say, if the next word starts with a vowel, then you will need ab, but otherwise, as here, it will be a. Do not confuse it with ad, meaning towards. They are not the same thing. The nuntius is laudata by the puellis. The messenger is praised by the girls. So notice this is the same sentence, just written from the different voice. It's also worth noting that if it's a thing that's being discussed, not a person, you can actually get away without the a or ab, and we just have the dominus is necator by or with a gladio. Both of those translations would make sense. So, in a passive sentence, the agent, the doer, is now going to be ablative instead of nominative. So, if we have a look at some of these same sentences from before, but now we're adding in the doer. I am greeted by my friends. The senax is videtur in the foro a custode. This old man is seen in the form by the guard. Oh, children, today you are being punished with or by the sword. Slightly bad school day. And finally, the portae of the urbis ab hostibus inconjuntur. The gates of the city are being burned by the enemy. Small note, you may have noticed that there's an ab there, despite the fact that h would normally count as a consonant. In Latin, it does not, it's a vowel. Don't worry about it. Okay, well that's our present passive. What about the other tenses? Well, for the imperfect passive, we're going to keep our basic endings, rur, ris, tur, mur, mini, untur, and now we're going to stick in a bar, 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 like our imperfect sheep being caught in a fence. This changes it from present to imperfect, an action uncompleted in the past. Lauda baris, therefore, we can see the baris ending there. You were being, or you used to be praised, presumably before you stopped doing work. The muri delebantur by the hostibus, the walls were being destroyed by the enemy. Cena cum amicis consumebatur, some accidental alliteration there. The dinner used to be eaten with friends, perhaps a reference to the pandemic. And finally, nos libri, we children, puniebamur, were being punished a magistro, by the teacher. We can see here, it's basically the same type of endings, all we're doing is sticking a ba in there, a bar, in order to change the tense. Now, at this stage, a clever student might work out that we went from ost mustis unt in the present tense active to bambas bat bams bartis bant. And very similarly for the passive, we went from ruris tur murmini untur to bar baris batter bamur bamni banter. Yes, the ending is funny. Moving on. So, what's going to happen with the future? Well, as you can see here, the future is slightly difficult in Latin in that there are two different types. For the active, we either have bo bis bit or we have am es et, and that depends upon what conjugation the verb is in. As a reminder, conjugation is a thing that you don't need to look it up. You can just remember it, but, as this previous PowerPoint from somewhere tells me, you can work it out if you know the present and the infinitive. Those are, to say, the first two principal parts of a verb, the bits that the dictionary gives you. Read. Well, as you might imagine, Latin does the same thing for the passive as it does for the active. That is to say, depending upon the conjugation, there are two sets of endings, because the Romans really loved learning endings, as far as I can tell. We keep our basics, rur, ris, tur, mur, mini, untur, but for a first or second conjugation verb, like ammo, it would then be bor, beris, bitur, bimur, bimini, buntur. Notice that the vowels there are a bit squiffy. Oh well, life is hard. For a third or fourth conjugation verb, like traho, instead, we get the endings ar, eris, etur, emur, emni, entur. If we look across, therefore, serve cras liba beris, we can see our ending beris here. There's got to be you will be somethinged. It is indeed slave tomorrow you will be set free. The second sentence, the milites, they mox jubebuntur, they soon will be ordered, oppugnare, to attack. For our third sentence, well, mitetur, you're going to work out that that's this future tense ending because it's on a slide about the future passive. And indeed it is. And the pistula will be mitetur tibi. A letter will be sent to you. Be careful, however, to distinguish this from a second conjugation verb. Deletur has that same ending etur, but that would be present tense because you need to pay attention to your conjugation. Fourth conjugation verbs are slightly easier, as we can see here with invenio, which keeps the I distinguishing the fourth conjugation. Surely the liberi, they will be found by the guards. Oh dear, poor children needing to learn their future passive endings. There's a lot of endings, as you can see on the board. Please notice the difference between the active and the passive. Ost mustis und goes to rurist her murmini unter. They keep a lot of the same patterns. The tricks that you use to help memorize the imperfect and future will still work for the passive, but you will need to put in the time to learn them, or you'll see a verb ending in bor or beris or something, and you'll be like, I have no idea, I die now. On that note, thank you very much, hope that helps.